Hi, in this video I am going to give you a quick analysis of the first slot of CET 25 day 1. So as you are aware, CET 25 is being conducted on 1st, 2nd and 3rd April, and today being the first day, we had some of our mentors who appeared in this particular slot, and this is based on the feedback that we got from these mentors as well as some of the students that we got a chance to speak to. So let's get started. Now, there are a few surprises in this year's CET, so we are going to talk about all of these things in this one slide that I have. So it's going to be a fairly quick discussion, but hopefully it will give all of you who are going to take it in slot 2 today or on day 2 or day 3 some insights as to what you can expect. Now let's start with the first thing. Now the format didn't change, right? So the test format, which is something that they had also mentioned, they continued with that format, which is the sectional test format. So you had individual sections for quant, logical reasoning, VARC and abstract reasoning. The number of questions also didn't change. So 50 in QA, LR 75 questions, VRC 50 and abstract reasoning 25 questions. But yes, there were surprises in terms of the composition of the individual sections or the kind of questions which were asked. So no surprise in terms of the format or the number of questions, that remain exactly the same, but surprises in terms of the composition of the individual sections. Now there were reports of the test starting a little late at some of the places, but that was just about 5 to 10 minutes delay. We haven't heard of any terrible experience as of now. Hopefully nobody had such experiences where the test started very late or they had any technical issues. We so far haven't heard of anything like that. Now moving on to the duration of the test, right? So there was no change there as well. So 150 minutes, 200 questions, no negative marking, right? So the standard marking scheme continued in this test. You had a sectional breakup. So on the right hand side at the top, you have a drop down through which you can change which section you want to attempt, and you can of course toggle between the sections. So on the top right corner, you have that drop down. You can choose which section you want to attempt, and on the left hand side, all the questions appear. So the question palette appears on the left hand side. The reported level of difficulty, so we spoke to, as I said, the mentors who took the test as well as the students. The overall report of the difficulty has been easy to moderate. Some students found it to be easy, some students found it to be moderate. Nobody really said that the test was very difficult, right? So we don't have anything which is very difficult. But yes, because there were these surprises, and when people are taking it in the very first slot, they don't know what to expect, right? Because of which there could be the element of surprise or the element of shock is higher in slot 1, right? So maybe because of that also some people had that reaction that there is a little bit of arbitrariness that happened in the test. So let's talk about the individual sections now. Now I'm going to start with the quant section. So in the quant section, 50 questions, the overall classification of difficulty can be easy to moderate, because there were some questions which were slightly lengthy. You had to calculate to get to the answer. But one important thing is it was heavy on arithmetic. So the standard areas that are tested, which is arithmetic, numbers, profit loss discount and so on and so forth, everything was basically there. Whether you talk about the individual topics such as TSD, time and work, etc., or the broad areas which is arithmetic, numbers, algebra, geometry, P&C, probability, questions appeared from all of these areas. So those of you who of course have prepared for quant very well, I think you should not have any problem tackling this. It was reported that there were 3 DI sets totaling about 10 questions. So not a lot of DI sets. So I'm guessing that if you have practiced enough, I think again it would have been very easy to handle it. Table based DI sets also appeared in this particular slot. Now let's talk about the next area, which is logical reasoning. This is where there were surprises. So 75 questions, the overall difficulty classification can be moderate. Uh, the first surprise is in the form of no critical reasoning questions. So the way you generally have, right, assumptions, inference, conclusion. So the verbal reasoning, right, was completely missing from this particular slot. We cannot say whether it will continue to happen in other slots or not, because CET, if you look at the history of CET, they have done a lot of random things where in one slot the composition that you get may not be the same composition in other slots. So it may be slightly different in your slot. Maybe in your slot you get CR questions, but in this particular slot there were no CR questions. Again, so be ready for anything and everything that can happen. So just be ready for surprises. The second thing that was reported is that a few math based questions. Now typically math based questions you don't see in the LR section, right? And this is something that got reported. We haven't been able to get the exact kind of questions as of now, but yes, there were some questions which demanded a little bit of knowledge of probability and things like that in the LR section as well, which is very surprising. So there is a clear distinction between what is LR and what is quant, And in fact, the mentors that I was speaking to, I asked them that were there more of series based questions, because series questions will definitely appear in the LR section. But it wasn't about series. A lot of these questions had some mathematical concepts which you needed to know before you answer these questions. So be ready to also see some math based questions in the logical reasoning section. Moving on to VRC, which came across as the biggest surprise of this particular test. So 50 questions, overall difficulty is moderate, and typically CET VRC has been on the easier side. But this time it was moderate purely because of this, which is 20 RC questions. So there were total 20 RC questions, and it was reported that there were almost 9 separate RCs on which these 20 questions were asked. So the rest of verbal, the 30 questions, was a standard affair. So synonyms, antonyms, sentence correction, and things like that. But when it comes to RCs, the length of the RC was also on the, it was slightly, the RCs were lengthy, they were not very, very short, and some of them had very few questions. So imagine reading, let's say, a 300 word passage, but you have only one question that you're supposed to answer based on this passage. So there were some RCs which were lengthy and had about 5 questions, but there were some RCs wherein you had only a single question based on it. So the people who walked in with that mindset that I'm going to do all the RCs maybe would have suffered a little bit with that strategy. So those who realize that it does not make to do all the RCs would have benefited from that approach, right? So just be ready for these kind of things that can happen in your slot as well, wherein you have, let's say, very few RCs or a lot of RCs, right? So it's not necessary that you may have 20 RCs. Maybe you have only 10 RC questions. So adjust your strategy basis how many questions you're getting. So just because you walked in with a particular strategy, don't stay married to that. You can always change your strategy a little bit. So in this particular slot, in the first slot of day 1, there are 20 RC questions, right? So those of you who generally struggle with RCs would have mostly left these questions, and somebody could have focused on the standard verbal kind of questions just to get more and more points in the limited amount of time and move forward to the other areas. And speaking of the last section, which is abstract reasoning, so no major surprises here. Overall easy is the classification of difficulty. But apart from the standard questions, you also had counting based questions. And generally these counting questions appear in the LR section compared to the abstract reasoning section. So abstract reasoning is more of which is the next image in the series or odd term in the series and analogy and so on and so forth, which also appeared. But you had a lot of counting based questions. So how many triangles are there in the figure, or how many squares are there in the figure, and so on. And then you also had question on the Venn diagram, which typically appears in the LR section. So you had these three figures, right? So there's a circle representing, let's say, a particular category, then there is a triangle, there's a rectangle, and so on, there is intersection. So those kind of questions appeared in the abstract reasoning section and not in the LR section, the way it normally does. So what you can see is there was a little bit of mixing up that happened maybe by the test setters, that some abstract reasoning questions should have been in the LR section. Some of those LR questions which were mathematical based should have been in the quant section, right? So these things have happened. Now what is more important, right? See, those of you already taken the test, right? There's nothing that can be done now. But those of you who are going to take it today in slot 2 or tomorrow or day after tomorrow, what you need to think of is there could be surprises. Maybe this composition or level of difficulty does not hold true for your slot. But because there are things that have happened, surprises have happened, you should just be mentally ready for it. So if at all there is any major change, you notice that some question type is completely new. Luckily, there were no new question types. So everything that you have seen in, let's say, mocks, you almost had the same kind of questions. The difficulty level was different, obviously, and then the jumbling up that I told about, right? That one particular area appeared in other area and so on. But again, these are minor number of questions. These are not the core of that particular section. So don't be scared of whatever has happened, right? So it's okay, completely okay to have to feel that okay, there were some changes compared to what you were expecting, but that's absolutely fine. So be mentally ready that when you walk into the test, if there are any changes, make sure that you change your strategy a little bit depending on the difficulty and do the maximum number of questions that you can solve. Now, right now, it's difficult to talk about how many questions one could have solved, right? And unless somebody actually takes the test, it is always difficult to talk about this. But overall impression of the test is that it is a moderate test. Now, if you look at the past history of CET, a typical moderate test, right? It's something where a 99 percentile, right, would lie somewhere close to about 125, 130. That's a sign of a moderate test. If the test comes out to be difficult, then that figure shifts below to about 120. if the paper comes out to be easy, that 99 percentile mark can go up to 140. So it appeared as if a test where somebody can go to 130 or more for a 99 percentile, right? That is why the overall classification is moderate. But yes, difficulty is a very subjective thing when it comes to evaluation. The way I look at difficulty, somebody else may have a different perception of it. And because there was an element of shock as well, being day one, slot one, the scores, the reported scores could be on the slightly lower side, right? Which means instead of 130 for a 99 percentile, maybe it can go down to say 125 as well, right? So we never know exactly how it will turn out. It depends a lot on the kind of aspirants taking the test and so on. So those things are something that cannot be completely commented upon. So right now we'll not get into that. But the idea of this video was to give you an understanding of what happened in today's test, so that you can be better prepared for for the test that you are going to take, right? And I hope the video has been helpful. It has given you what happened in a very brief amount of time. In case there are any questions, you let us know in the comment section. Those of you who also appeared for this slot, maybe if you can drop in a small review of how your experience was, it will definitely help future aspirants. So thank you so much for watching. I wish all of you all the best who are going to take it today, tomorrow and day after tomorrow. Let me know how it was for you, and I hope this has helped you. Bye, take care.